welcome everybody to the November Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting. Thanks for joining us. I'll call us to order. It's almost about 7 o'clock. Let's see, I don't think we need a whole lot of introductions with the same crowd as usual. No special guests tonight. So I'll move into the adoption of the agenda. Corey sent that out earlier. Any thoughts, updates, comments, or motions to approve? Okay, great. All in favor, say aye, or indicate somehow. Aye. Any opposed? Nope. And we have nobody online, right? We have
Eric and Lori.
okay. Great. Sorry, I just can't see them. So.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, sorry I didn't mention
If
earlier.
they're once they turn their camera on.
Okay. Next, I just want to make sure I didn't hear anything else. Oh, there's Richie. Here, Richie. Do you need me to go back and do anything with the agenda now that we have another member running? Okay. Hey, Richie, we just adopted the agenda for the evening. And we are on to the review and approval of the last meeting's minutes, which Corey also sent out earlier today. Any questions or comments on those? Corrections, updates, or motions to approve? Motion to approve. Great. Second. Great. All in favor of approving the minutes as written? Please indicate your approval. That sounds like everybody. Any opposed? I hear none. Thank you. Thanks for writing this up for. There we are. Now we're on to the business part. So thank you for that. First on the list is Lakefront property updates. Is it you?
Yeah.
Great.
I guess I don't know if Councilmember Bodie wants to chime in on anything, but I sent the link out to the consultants, did a update of kind of where they are. You guys wanted to watch that. But we will next, they're getting everything ready for concept sketches and pricing out. And so the January Parks Board meeting, they will be in attendance, and we'll probably have a full 2-hour meeting with them. And we'll go over options and take a look at everything and get your guys' input. And then we'll have another open house community meeting to gather more input on after your guys' review of those. And then they'll start putting things together from council. So
That would be that open house day in February.
yeah.
So that was on the timeline.
So yeah, it'll be at the January meeting, which will be 23rd. Our meeting is January 23rd.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just add that the consultants briefed and Corey briefed the council, and it was I think a very good detailed briefing with many good questions. So that went very well. And one of the major themes was that there's a lot of consensus on the comments coming from the community. But then there was a question of, are we getting all segments of the community? But we are, we are getting the word out to, we sent postcards to every household. And we have information on the website. So we are trying to get information out to everybody. But those were I think there were just some questions about that, but the overall presentation and the overall consistency of the recommendations that we were getting from the community were, I think, very interesting and gave us good promise that we will have some good design sketches and alternatives going forward that the community will be able to get behind. The only other thing I'll say is I encourage you to look at the materials. They give you a pretty good sense of where the consultants are in the work. They're moving very fast because, once again, reminding you of that spring deadline for trying to get funding requests in, because it's only an every 2-year process. So I think we're doing well, and I appreciate the work the board is doing. I appreciate all the community members who came to the open house. So that's about it. I don't really have anything more to add unless you have questions.
The one thing, it looks like there's a big gap between when they went to the council meeting and the January. Is there any status update? I guess it's not that much, it's 2 months basically.
No, so they'll be at the park board meeting in January, but
Yeah.
they're working on concept sketches and
2
designs.
months.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Is there-
they've gotten all like survey data, community input,
And the survey is closed now.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll be looking for your recommendations once you have something to chew on like that. So when the materials that they pull together in terms of concepts and alternatives are things that we as the council, with 2 new council members, and a new mayor, will be looking forward to hearing from all of you on. So I will continue to remind you about that. But once there is something specific, we would actually want to see some formal recommendations from you. It doesn't mean you have to be unanimous. Just we want to make sure that we have all your views in writing at the appropriate time before the council makes any decisions. If that makes sense.
Yep. And then in the scope, we put extra meeting possibility for the consultant to come either back to our board if we need another meeting or something like that, so.
Also, sometimes our committees, actually, our committee chair or chair and vice chair or members who want to will come to council and present their recommendations. So that's also a possibility going forward, and we would welcome that if you wanted to do it.
That would be in March. Is that right?
Yeah.
Probably, okay.
That's about the right time, yes.
Sorry.
In the council presentation, one of the things that they talked about was that the feedback that they got was fairly uniform of not looking for active activities. What's the scope of that? Is that like not play fields?
Yeah.
I understood, but like playgrounds.
Playgrounds are
Yes.
still off,
Yeah.
yeah, swimming and
I
playing.
know at the PTA meeting, there was a topic of discussion of having it and, having it be close enough that
Yeah, I
you
don't
got one
think,
person swimming and another person, like that was the assumption that there would be a playground. So I just wanted to be sure that wasn't.
yeah, we'll get all that looked at, in that January. meeting
Yeah.
For stuff like that, but yeah, I don't think like a volleyball court is really necessary on the table right now. They might come back and that might be an option for you guys to look at, but, I think everyone's kind of on the same page.
I thought playground equipment, a picnic shelter, swimming and paddleboarding kinds of activities, those were all things that seemed to fit into the vision or the feedback that we got from the community.
Did anyone go to the open house? We hadn't talked too much about that. I saw you there. You were there, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that? How that went? What you heard from other people or concerns? Or anything?
Are you asking me? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very
We're all
well.
trying to pass the buck.
I'm asking other people on the board if they were.
That's what I thought. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah.
I just couldn't hear who it was directed to. Thanks.
Anybody who wants to answer.
I thought it was a great crowd. It was a lot of high turnout, a lot of good conversations. I don't know, and I think this was something that came up in the council briefing also, that I don't know how representative of the entire town it was. And I know that was I can't remember now who on the council was asking questions about this. But, you know, making sure that we're hearing from the full diversity of the community, I think is important going forward. I don't know if there's more that we can be doing here in that regard. I'm sure there is. I don't know what it would be. But as it gets to those design phases, I think the questions that were coming up for the consultants were sort of, it's a lot of people who seem like they're within walking distance, and is it reaching? And I felt like looking around the room at the open house, I felt that the same thing could be said there.
Anything to add? Okay.
I personally thought like the layout of the park with like the pieces was kind of cool and a new way to kind of really see how things can be laid out.
Made it feel real.
Yeah,
What might actually happen, right?
yeah, park board game.
I will say I was very impressed by the PCG representatives, the way that they were managing and fielding, big hard questions from the community. And so it made me excited about the process and it made me excited about the outcome.
All right, so the next thing maybe we should all, if we can, double check that the January 23rd, 2024 date is still a good idea for us. Check one calendar, but it should validate the other. Right.
And we're skipping next month because it's almost next month already.
Yeah, I mean,
It would
yeah,
be
I have to
the week of the holidays.
see.
We'll validate that with.
Yeah.
I think we talked about that before.
Simply.
Yeah, but for that meeting, plan to be probably occupied for the full 2 hours.
7 to 9, it's to be 7 o'clock. Yeah.
One thing that did come up at the open house that I hadn't expected to be as much of a topic was people who there were some people there, I don't think it was a lot of them, but some really wanted to keep all of the buildings on the site. And, I don't, there are reasons why that won't happen, but I think it's worth our bearing in mind that there is at least some vocal part of the community that has that concern, and think about how to be talking about that. Addressing whatever concerns may motivate
Yeah,
that.
we'll be trying to salvage those as much as we can, repurpose what we can. Consultants have some ideas of maybe saving some for, on-site historical purposes or whatever they can get out of those, but yeah, those are not in livable condition.
I walked around them. I don't
Yeah.
feel some deep historical significance there that I want to advocate on behalf of. I just, Bill Gates' father stayed in one of them at some point. This was brought up to me, and I report it now to the board. But yeah, there was more than one person who seemed very concerned about that possibility. So,
From like the whole preservation standpoint.
or among others, yes.
I think it's the buildings along the north side of the property that have asbestos and are the ones that were targeted for not keeping because of the cost benefit, basically. But yes, there was some comment like that. What I liked is that people were talking to each other in the room. I thought that was good.
And my understanding is that it would not, like, because of the way that portion of it was purchased, it wouldn't be possible to keep buildings there regardless.
Yeah, at this point.
Yeah. So it's not, I
For
mean,
multiple reasons.
one person I
Not
used the
just-
phrase cost benefit, and they took umbrage at that phrase also.
Mhm.
So, which I understand, it gets thrown around in ways that are not always helpful, but in this case, it wouldn't, it's not even cost benefit, it can't happen, it's how we bought the land, so.
I will say one sort of section of voices that I feel like I haven't heard in the conversation so far, but which I have heard kind of percolating in the community with small business owners in Lake Forest Park who are sort of always seeking opportunities to have businesses in LFP that are not at the town center. And I know in particular, like, the interest in having concessions or having some sort of space in the park where there could be like small business opportunities was really, some people I was talking to were really keen on that. So I don't know if that has been, I mean, I know that some of the designs have concessions, so I don't know where that is, but that's something we didn't talk about at all. It's sort of what's happening over here.
Yeah, I think that is on their radar.
It's on their radar?
Yeah, from survey input, I think that was something that.
That's PTA meeting, I know people also mentioned that as something that we're looking towards.
So since we're on that particular one, we have January 23rd as a pretty important meeting for us. Any concerns with schedules with that right now? We're seeing a lot of indications that it's a fine date. Sounds good. But if we need to reschedule, we should really do it soon, so we might be able to figure that out. So reserve that date. And is it right? That's probably a good one to be in person. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
if you guys can, great,
Right.
otherwise it will be set up like this, the consultant will be here in person.
And do you know what we have? Will they provide us with a few of those options or models in advance or sketches or whatever to look at and think about, or is it all in the meeting?
But I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Will be.
But that is still an open public meeting, so lots of people can come and see the proposals.
Yep.
And hear about it, learn about it, whatever. Okay. Cool. Any other questions or comments on that topic?
I was curious if there'd be a way for us to review the survey results.
A lot of it's in that PowerPoint.
Yeah,
um,
at one time in my life, I did survey analysis, and so there's part of me that wants to like play with the data,
Yeah,
but
I'm sure I
that may
did,
be,
um,
I may not actually get around to it, so.
yeah.
Well, with that kicking off our January, maybe a good time to kind of, maybe that's why Corey put it on the agenda this way, but the 2024 work plan is next on our list to do. Corey sent out the 2023 work plan also earlier today. So you can take a look at that. That's often a good starting point for our next year.
Yeah, and maybe we'll try that. On the screen. Not something we have to, I just want to get on our radar. I was looking at it and a lot of this can really go into our next year as well. So I kind of just want people to look at this, review it, see if they want to add, adjust, eliminate anything.
At what point would 5 acre wood be part of the master plan conversation?
When staff had time and direction to
That's
begin that.
seems fair.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if there was a plan for that plan, or if it's, yeah. That's
Not quite yet, but it is on the next to-do list for partners.
I'm not trying to
Yeah.
add more to your plate.
No.
And I had mentioned at a previous meeting, not the pros plan,
Yeah.
there was another city plan that was,
Oh,
you were putting on our radar for,
comp plan?
yes. maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something that's not something within the scope of the work plan that we need to do? It's just
No,
getting pointed at some point to that process.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could add, I'm the liaison to the planning commission also. And they're working on the comprehensive plan, and there will be a section on parks, recreation, and you know, walkways, public enjoyment. And so there will be a time when it will be, I think, desirable for the Parks Board to review the draft materials and weigh in with the Planning Commission. So I think that's an item that, Corey, if you could check to see when that might be. They have quite a detailed schedule, so if you could see when that might come up, that would be a good thing. And then the other item I'd mention is the Climate Action Committee is going to present its draft plan in, I believe, January to the council. And so it might be good to ask them to come back, maybe not at the January meeting, but at the February meeting of the Parks and Recreation Board to make a presentation on their climate action plan recommendations and see if there are any intersections between Parks and Recreation with what they're recommending. Right now, I don't know the details well enough to know if there are, but I do recall that they came to a meeting or two, and so putting that tentatively on the schedule for February might make sense.
Do you think it would be useful, Lori, maybe it's you have the insight of that, would it be useful to have a vision or a view of that before our January meeting, just to kind of keep that in mind?
Sure. The chair of that committee is Maddie Larson, and there are summary materials that they're working from, you know, summary in terms of an outline of what has to be in the comprehensive plan. The main thing I would suggest, because they're not going to make big changes in the comprehensive plan, except where state legislation has mandated it, is maybe Corey can send out the Parks and Recreation part of the current comprehensive plan, and that would give you a good idea of where things might go with some edits. Corey, can you do that? Get the Parks and Recreation components of the comprehensive plan, because the whole document's very long. So if Corey can pull out an excerpt, that would be, I think, a great benefit to all of you.
And I was also thinking the climate action.
when they got more draft version, I will send that out.
Thank you. That's great. And that seems to probably fit on the work plan on the last box, right? Vice council and other boards, commissions, committees.
Yeah, and then Tyler, I was thinking way back when, before we even had the waterfront park, when you and I were, I think, the only remaining members of the Parks Board a group who were there. That we had a lot of discussions starting about what could people do to donate, or make contributions, or how could the city solicit contributions, or, you know, what if people wanted to donate their properties as part of their estate planning? I think that is a really active topic for the council for this upcoming year. I think there's a point of intersection with the Parks and Recreation Board, but it's a broader issue of, you know, if, what can the city do to enhance fundraising or to accept contributions, or and some of that could come up with the waterfront park as well. But I think we were thinking before about what if someone wanted to donate artwork or a bench or something like that, or what if the Stewardship Foundation wanted to, you know, enhance the boundaries of one of the parks with a property acquisition. How would that all work? And so I'm not sure that our city ordinances are very clear on that, but personally, if someone wanted to contribute something, I would want us to be able to accept it.
I think another one that either you'd mentioned or come up in prior discussions was sort of the model of sponsoring a brick, right? And so
Right, right.
have that kind of be in the park somehow.
Yeah, there's lots of talk about that.
Lots of bricks in that park, so. How would that work? Is a donation?
So, it's not a most major issue for the board, but in terms of being a possible issue for discussion, especially if we do wrap up a lot of the Lakefront Park work by mid-year. That might be a really good topic for discussion and for recommendations.
Yeah, that one has been on the board agenda kind of off and on, it seems like for a few years. There's the artwork and naming guidelines or some or ordinances that are
Yeah, we,
scattered.
yeah, I'll the kind of go through and grab, because it isn't a couple different places, so I'll.
And it's possible that some other small cities like ours have similar ordinances or provisions. So it probably warrants a fresh look. Once our new council members are settled in, it's something maybe Corey and I can ask our city attorney to look into.
Yeah, we started down that path a while ago, also looking at other comparable cities to see what this is a novel issue. So I think Kirkland had a pretty good one. They're bigger, clearly a bigger setup, but yeah, so there's other models out there.
And I had wondered about this also, just purely what the rules were when we were talking about bike racks.
Mhm.
If I haven't even talked to them about, like, if AMP in town center wanted to donate bike racks, would they be able, I don't, what would they have to do to make that work? And how far any of us as individuals can go in taking that suggestion to anyone, right? So, yeah, understanding what those rules are would be useful.
And when it comes to that, like, do they want their name on it? Or do they want to?
Right, and then if they do, yeah,
or like,
what do they,
what's that
can they get some advertising out of it, or can they not?
For recognition.
Recognition, yes.
Or big glowing lights, like, rent your bike here. But gotta fund the park, so.
Yeah, is the question that's being asked, can we fundraise, or what are the parameters around fundraising?
I think it'd be one of the parameters, because people can donate. But I think going to Lori is, maybe we need to look at refining language and be a little bit more park specific on items and stuff like this.
And yeah, sure, it's, if someone donates their piece, their sculpture, does that mean that the city has to take it?
Yeah.
What's the, right? Want to. Oh, and are there liability things? I'm sure there's the other side, if someone donates a bike rack or they donate a bench, is it ADA compliant? Is it just do all the other things?
Yeah.
And who decides?
Right.
I think a lot of that is spelled out in the regs, or the ordinance, sorry. So I remember it's not super crisp and clear. It covers a few of the issues, like somebody had an issue, so they made an ordinance about it in that kind of way. But it doesn't like give a good framework for it. So I think understanding it first would be important, and then maybe take what that understanding is and think about how we want to fly the parks in general, what kind of issues we see coming up, and think if there need to be any either changes to it or just a repackaging of it to make it fit for the parks context. Could be helpful. But I think we might have some other things to do before that. January parks work. How about that second one?
Yeah, straight it.
Like we just we've done any of it.
Brendan, I had said I was gonna do that back in the height of COVID, when I had nothing to do except my job and raise 2 children at home. And I, never did anything.
Yeah.
So I didn't know about it, somebody else wants to take it.
So what was their audition of what that would,
It was, doing little history. I had like an image of like going to the archives and finding cool little like blurbs about what these parks are and doing sort of mini little histories of what is the park, visit this, are you looking for this kind of outing, do this park? So just like little cute little content that can be put into the
Once a month on the
Yeah.
e-news and,
yeah, like spotlight on a park. I think it's a great idea, but that's not worth my time and energy.
I'm thinking about whether that's something that I wanna put my hand up for.
Okay.
So maybe we won't strike it just yet,
Okay.
maybe we still will.
It's been a field that I think has been, or that sort of that general concept has been on this work plan for many years. We had one back in the old days about perennial kind of recurring idea of a scavenger hunt parks. Remember that? I think Lori probably does too. Corpse Report does. The various iterations of that, and it's just hard to organize and actually do. So we scale it back a little bit to get to this idea of what if just a blurb kind of thing, like a paragraph, a few sentences, interesting kind of a teaser to bring get the information of parks out there. And sort of like inspire people. Not interactively, not to manage it, not to like arrange prizes and review photos on Instagram or whatever, but just to put it out there.
Yeah, I didn't know when it said social media, I didn't know if it
Yeah.
was something more than monthly on the city's accounts or creating some sort of parks account.
It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, but I didn't know if there were, yeah. I don't need to reinvent anything if that conversation already happened.
There's kind of like our size that does that well. Like that's one, benchmark yourself against what it might be doing it.
right.
But I mean, some version of a monthly column seems doable. I feel like I can conditionally say I would do something like
Bet you could get someone to take over a month that you didn't.
that. Exactly. Well, I mean, I'm thinking about conversations that we've had here. I mean, at some yoga doesn't have to be all summer, but
Right.
at some point, someone might want to write about yoga in the parks. Conversations we've had about birds and natural history and trees. People here love trees, so the trees are leafing out. What does that mean? Yeah, there are people around, and I'm sure people who are doing volunteer work in the parks might want to do an update on what happened. I get from the Grace Cole group. This is what we did this month this is what our project was. Someone donated a huge pile of wood chips and we spread them out. Or this Boy Scout troop came and wanted to pull all the ivy out of this. Like there's stuff like that. There's stuff happening. So
You can organize it. Absolutely right. Or at some point.
and I think one of the things that has struck me on joining this board is this, as with PTA, like you don't realize how much that goes on is just like folks doing it. And if you don't tell the story of what people are doing, they don't realize that there's not some vast city staff that's doing all the work. It's just people like stepping up and doing cool stuff. And so if we want to have more volunteers, if we want to have that outreach, I think it's good to find ways to highlight that. So I'm happy to.
Maybe a little homework project if anybody's interested. There's a blurb to be written about a park somewhere. And they don't have to be, they don't have to be like breaking news kind of blurbs. They can kind of go and anywhere. But in that newsletter, it'd be great, right?
Yeah, the news, like the e-news goes out the last Wednesday of the month typically, so I need articles like that week before.
Roughly what length would be,
Like,
I'm talking 1,000 words,
no,
I'm talking
like,
200.
yeah, couple of interest.
There were comments in the presentation that people weren't even aware that there's a park over there. So if the lack of awareness, even on there's your first.
Yeah. Did you know we have parks?
And there are a lot of like tiny little park properties and. That one is tucked away, you know, even if you go to the Civic Club, it's like, what's that? Where are those people standing? What's that dock that people are standing on? That's not part of the Civic Club, what is it? Who knows? Yeah,
It still has potential.
yeah, and I mean, 5 Acre Wood is not, you know, there's not a ton of signage there, people who, you know, I moved here around the time that it was bought, and there was a lot of conversation then, but if you came later, it's just sort of, is it property that's gonna be developed, what's it gonna be?
Great, good, glad to have some thoughts on that, it's great. Any others on the list that we have other thoughts on? I think it's great to bring it up now, Corey, just to kind of get us thinking about it. Maybe January, February, we kind of finalize the actual plan.
Yeah.
Your vision.
Yeah, so if anyone has like comments, you can email me them. I bet January meeting, we probably won't get to it. And we'll probably give this back in February for approval.
Is the purpose of the work plan, I was not here when this was developed, to like our commitment to what's gonna happen in that year?
Commitment's a strong word. Just
As here, clearly things should always be so.
goals, we are trying to work towards some of these, not everything gets done. and-
This is our priority.
Yeah.
Areas. And the format, and it's just, correct me where I'm wrong here, but this format comes from the council. And kind of is what we give back to them to tell them kind of what we're working on through the year. Is that a general summary, Lori?
Yes, and we technically approve your work plan, knowing that you might not do everything on it, that it's aspirational. And provides a sense of priorities, and also you can add things to it and subtract to it later. As you go along, if something comes up that you'd rather work on. So yes, it's it's kind of semi-official in that sense. Right, the council, because the council does want to know what you all are working on or making recommendations on. So I think you've got it right.
We did all have to sign it in blood.
Okay, we're not-
No blurbs.
Yeah, so once we present or accept it, Tyler and whoever else wants to go, we'll go to the council meeting, and present it, do a little recap of the year one. And what the next year was like.
And it's high level enough that, the yoga, if there were other things to add to, other activities like yoga in the parks, or Richie, you've been working on a concert or performances like that, we probably don't need to add that specifically, as long as it's under the heading of community vitality and recreation opportunities, probably.
Yeah, and then I believe Corey has already opened up an institutional account, and so we can go ahead and take the next steps towards applying for a grant for culture, and then we can start having extra funds to do something similar to what other cities are doing that are geared for our community.
Great.
I mean, do we want to put that into the work plan, or does it cover what we?
Well, I kind of look at it as under that community
Yeah.
participation.
Yeah,
We can add it, as like. We can.
There's some part of me that likes to update plans so that it looks like something has actually changed. But I don't want to overcommit anyone to anything, but make a commitment on anyone else's behalf.
Yeah, maybe we can take out, create walking tour routes and add that there.
Yeah.
Or.
Maybe one day we'll get to that.
Yeah.
One day.
It's a good idea.
That's why keeping ideas up on there is good too, so.
So keep thinking about the work plan, and we got some time to finalize it, so all good ideas. Any other thoughts to add right now?
The community participation, I'm just, with the park planning process. I wonder if we want to be at all more formal about doing outreach as it moves to the next stages, and that's reminding me of that. We had the Google Doc that you circulated, and I did a presentation to the PTA, but I didn't do more than that, and I feel guilty. And I wonder if we want to think about anything more that we could be doing or should be doing to make sure that that we're getting out there on behalf of the Parks Board and on that process, or just in general on the things that the parks could be or are doing.
No, I think it's a good time between that community participation and the master plan, right, and how those things go together. And maybe that comes up in the next couple meetings, like how we do that, what the opportunities are, what the timeline is. Trying to see where that, I mean, we have the charrette in mid-February, which I just like to say, I love the charrette.
And I mean, some of the community outreach is getting people to that,
To it,
right?
Yeah, so how we do that. No,
So then even once the plan is in place, that's not the end of the process either. And continue keeping people engaged and keeping people bought in on whatever plan emerges.
informed and ideally excited about it.
And understanding the timeline and
Yeah.
not being realistic about it and what the commitments are that would have to go along with it. I mean, there's some amount of money that will come along from somewhere. Possibly from the city, possibly from taxes, so.
Yeah, so let's think about how to make that connection more clear. I think it's a good one. Kind of captured vaguely in there and provide information on parks,
Yeah,
but I think you're getting at something more specific.
yeah, and I'm not saying in terms of changing that, I just,
Nope.
I would like, we should probably talk more about what we're doing. And do we ever, or do the city boards and committees and commissions ever have joint meetings like with the tree board or with the climate committee to explore areas of overlap of what we're doing to make sure we're not.
Yeah, it does happen, and like the planning commission during that comp plan section might be one of those opportunities. So, when there's reason.
Not just for the sake of doing it.
Although we've done a couple, maybe not joint meetings, but we've
Or
invited
like
people
chairs, like
to each
chairs
other's
to go,
meetings,
yeah.
to share information and learn about each other's. Those are kind of fun. Nice to have. Any other thoughts? Great. What's next on the list? December, January PRAB meeting. PRAB. Is a big word. So I think we talked about January. I think the other part slash the thing before that would be December. And I think the proposal is that we don't have a December meeting. Because it's probably late December. Not the greatest time for a community meeting. And we're kind of early. We're close to December already, so it's kind of a short time.
And there will be no updates from the consultants at that point.
Not a lot of change.
I will, if they get me anything before the January meeting, I'll.
Okay. Any concerns about canceling that meeting? The late December one, or any December meeting? Great. I got a couple of kids' birthdays in there, they really want those, so. Yeah. Tell me about it. Okay, then we're on to other. I think we had the floriculture update from Richie. Any other business? The other business? Yes, that's totally right. I can't think of anything. Park master plan is the main one for us. All right, Lori, anything else from the council's perspective?
No, nothing new, nothing more than what we've covered, which we've covered a lot tonight in
Yeah.
terms of possible, things that are gonna happen in 2024. I guess the only other thought I have is we have 2 new council members, and maybe, for your February or March meeting, we should invite the new council members to come and visit you.
Great idea.
And you can get to know them a little bit better, and also they can, they'll still be on the learning curve at that point. So that's, I guess, the only other possible issue or topic I have to offer for you guys to think about.
Let's go.
When do they get sworn in?
They will get sworn in the very end of December. Like the 29th probably, so that they can officially start January 1st or 2nd. There usually is an inauguration party sometime in January, sometimes at the Civic Club. But they're already sworn in by the time that happens, because we don't want to have a situation where they're not already ready to go at the beginning of January. So it's usually a private event where they get sworn in the very end of December, but then there's an official inauguration kind of celebration sometime in January. I don't believe the date's been set yet.
Maybe in 2 years it'll be at the new public record.
You way better, private club.
That's right. That's what I was thinking.
One thing I wanted to ask about, I emailed you about it just to see, and I'm not sure if I was totally clear in what I was asking either. But at a PTA meeting, we had a state representative come to present, which made me realize that there's also possibly legislative outreach that would go along with the parks process. And again, I didn't bring it up at that meeting because I didn't want to cross the streams, but I don't know what, and I also don't want to step on the council's toes in terms of what they might be doing. But if it would be appropriate, or if it would be worth thinking about any sort of advocacy plan for the Parks Board to be supporting the broader development, or if that's something that would be better left to city staff and the council as elected officials.
It is something that both the city staff and the council might be involved with. We are in legislative district number 1 now, which is so our representatives still don't know us that well. Doing something once we have the conceptual plans to reach out to our state legislators, and also get them prepared in case we try to get some grant money through the state legislative process. Because we've been able to get money for culverts through the state legislative process now and then. So it's a great idea, Tyler. I don't think that we've even thought about that or thought that far ahead as council members. But it's a great thought, and I'll keep in mind when we do try to schedule some outreach to invite any members of the board who would like to come to participate in that. And Corey, just make a mental note of that one too as well.
Yeah, and a lot of those times too, letters from the park board or individual park board members is where that really comes in handy too, when council or staff is going to request that funding. That's where it kind of goes hand in hand, so.
Document our support for it
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so. Yeah,
Yeah, and this end of year time before, like January, they're gonna come back to session and it's gonna be crazy for them. But we had a really nice meeting, and it was great. She came and toured the school, and So it was, if there are things like that. And there was some party that was like, oh, I should also talk about this new park and. It's their district too, and she should know about it, and as you said, Councilmember, it was in the 2020 census that we got redistricted into that. So none of the two state representatives or the state senator had previously represented Lake Forest Park, so they just don't know us as well. They don't know all the different things. Right? You know, didn't know the school, didn't know the area, they didn't know the financial stuff that the Shoreline School District has been going through. So just getting them caught up on the conversations and what people in town, what their constituents are thinking about.
Yeah, and I would say overall, they're used to dealing with bigger cities, so we're kind of a little bit of a surprise and learning curve for them too, so.
Right, well, are there any citizens around to comment? Other than us? No other citizens, okay, so citizen comments are closed. I guess with that, unless there are any other items for the benefit of the group. I'm seeing no hands or anything, so I will adjourn our November meeting. Thank you, everybody, see you in January.
Thank you, happy holidays all,
You too, bye.
bye.